of the discussion. So on behalf of the Rutgers chapter for Faculty for Justice in Palestine, I really want to express
Fiction
my,
tournament too.
uh, my deep gratitude to our esteemed panel, especially given their willingness to participate on incredibly short notice and to be part of this discussion. We're no less grateful to be in conversation with all of you because all of the work that you've been doing over the past years and especially the past year um, to uphold and secure First Amendment rights, academic freedom, and the struggle for justice in Palestine. It's a tremendous honor to share this virtual stage with you. Also very grateful to my FJP colleagues who have helped to make this event possible. At Rutgers, we've been thinking quite a lot about the question of Palestine in relationship to the law in the past week. Roz Siegel spoke last Saturday at the Center for Security, Race, and Rights on anti-Semitism and Palestinian genocide. This past Tuesday, we screened the Al Jazeera documentary on war crimes in Gaza, which devastatingly demonstrates the exceptional treatment of Palestine in and by purported defenders of international law. And this despite the International Criminal Court's finding that the war in Gaza is plausibly genocidal and, as of today, issued warrants for the arrest of both Netanyahu and Gallant. In today's meeting, we are turning to the Palestinian exception with respect to another set of cherished legal principles, the freedom of expression and the specific protections on academic freedom in the university. The extent and operation of this exception has been on spectacular display since last spring, with the widespread repression of student-led campus protests calling on universities to divest from companies that profit from or contribute to Israel's human rights violations, and the halt as well to institutional arrangements with Israeli universities who likewise contribute to these violations. At Rutgers, 80% of our students voted last spring in favor of both divestment and ending our memorandum of understanding with Tel Aviv University. And now it's the turn of the faculty to vote. Starting December 2nd, the Rutgers AAUP full and part-time faculty union chapters will vote on a referendum that makes similar calls. This vote is the immediate context in which we've assembled this panel of experts on Palestine and academic freedom. And we very much hope, and I actually more than hope, I have confidence that it will clarify how and why the question of justice for Palestine is, in fact, a labor and hence a union issue. Our focus on academic freedom tonight makes this painfully clear. So without further ado, I'll introduce our speakers and say a few words about format. I want to leave as much time as possible for our discussion, so I'll be brief and highlight those aspects of your collective work that relate most directly to the subject. So Joan Scott, welcome, is Professor Emerita in the School of Social Science at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, recipient of myriad awards and honors, and also no stranger to Rutgers and the Rutgers community, having been a visiting professor in the history department for several decades during her tenure at IAS. Many of you know her for her path-breaking work in the history of gender, sexuality, secularism, and critical historical methodology. But what I want to highlight this evening is Professor Scott's long engagement with the question of academic freedom, arguably one that you've been engaged with since your childhood. And over the course of your career as long-serving member and former chair of the AAUP Committee on Academic Freedom and Tenure. So you've been involved with the specific question of academic freedom in Palestine, at least since a Bellagio conference that you tried to organize on the issue in 2006 was shut down in the face of political opposition. In 2013, Professor Scott published a powerful statement, Changing My Mind, about the boycott, that is, ever more relevant and resonant today. Since then, she's continued to write and speak and advocate on the topic, including in a recently published volume, Knowledge, Power, and Academic Freedom, that came out with Columbia University Press in 2019, and an even more recent defense of the AAUP from the attack lodged against it by fire that was published in the Inside Higher Education a mere 3 days ago. Jonathan Feingold is Associate Professor of Law at Boston University, where he specializes in questions of race, law, and social science. Trained at UCLA Law School, he specialized in critical race studies and has contributed to significant DEI initiatives there and beyond it. So I first got to know Professor Feingold and his work last year after learning of the letter that he wrote to the House Education Committee in response to its purported investigation against Rutgers, Newark's Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and our colleague, Professor Sahar Aziz. It was signed by over 500 prominent law faculty from across the country. I was also a signatory to another one of his amazing letters, that of concerned Jewish faculty who opposed the effort to impose the IRA definition, equating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism into federal law. Thanks to his tremendous effort, it was signed by over 1,200 concerned Jewish faculty, and he also graciously acted as an advisor to us in our local efforts to defend our students here at Rutgers. Finally, I've just had the pleasure of meeting Jonathan Wallace, who is a retired litigator and has, over the course of the past year, developed a full-time pro bono practice representing students and faculty retaliated against for pro-Palestinian expression in administrative proceedings and litigation. I've heard directly from friends of mine whose children he is defending, what truly amazing work he has been doing on this score. And I'll add that he has been a member of the National Lawyers Guild since he was arrested at the Zuccotti Park eviction in 2011. And he thanks the National Lawyers Guild for defending him in that case and all the doors that it has opened since. So the plan here is to take about 50 or so minutes to have a discussion amongst us with some questions that I've prepared, and then we'll open things up to questions from the audience. So to begin, as I mentioned in my rapid opening remarks, Professor Scott, you wrote your piece, Changing My Mind, about the boycott back in 2013. And so I thought that it might be helpful to have you revisit and explain, since, we have members in our audience and in our union who are kind of pondering this question at present. If you could revisit and explain what changed your mind on the question of BDS as a longstanding advocate of academic freedom, and how you came to see BDS as, in fact, compatible and indeed necessary for its protection.
Well, thank you, Judith, and thanks for organizing this. It reminds me of Vietnam era teach-ins that I participated in as a graduate student 100 years ago. So what led me to change my mind were two things. One, a personal experience, and the other, a more intellectual one. And the personal experience was that in 2006, when the AAUP was debating whether or not to condemn academic boycotts, I organized a conference that, as you mentioned, that was supposed to take place at Bellagio. We got funding from various funders. We invited a range of people we wanted to have a serious academic discussion about the implications of BDS for academic freedom. So we invited people from Cuba, from the former Yugoslavia, from South Africa, and from Israel, and several Palestinians. I don't remember the how the numbers were distributed, but the Israelis objected to the invitation to the Palestinians, and began circulating memos on their websites, to the extent they had them at that point. But there were emails flying around condemning this event because inviting Palestinians would legitimize their point of view. And the then president-elect of the AAUP, Kerry Nelson, um, displayed his Zionist credentials by not only opposing the event, which really was not meant as an event to endorse BDS, was meant as an event, as a time to really have a serious conversation about this. He not only tried to nix it in the executive council of the AAUP, but he went to all of our funders and he told them that I and the other person who had organized this were rogue members who had violated the rules of AAUP organization. You know, he did all of the things you can imagine doing, and that we were really enemies of Israel and anti-Semites, and that this thing couldn't happen, and it didn't. The Rockefeller Foundation withdrew because they said they didn't feel they could have enough police security for this event. The only foundation that didn't withdraw was the Ford Foundation, but they alone could not fund the conference. And they paid for a special issue of the AAUP journal Academe, which has some of the papers in it because the Israelis refused to have their papers in it, so that it would look like we had excluded them. And so the record would not include their inclusion. So that was the personal part. When I experienced an attack on my academic freedom and those of the others of us who were going to participate in this conference, by a powerful Israel lobby that was intent on silencing any Palestinian voice that might be heard. That was 2006. And then I also started to talk to people I knew who were supporting BDS. And I have to say, I started to read things I hadn't read before. And part of it was organizing for the conference. I met some of the Palestinian scholars who were invited to the conference, whose work I started to read. And I wasn't quite as innocent as Ta-Nehisi Coates was when he went to Israel last year, but I had a similar kind of comeuppance. And that was to discover that what the Israelis were going to do, or what the Zionist supporters of Israel were going to do, was shut down academic freedom at all costs. Gerald Feinberg, one of the guys one of the Israelis who condemned our conference, was a big upholder of academic freedom. Argued that we were violating academic freedom by inviting the Palestinians. And then, of course, when all you have to do is start reading about the experiences of Palestinian academics in Israel, to know that not only are they treated as second-class citizens, a whole series of things happened actually between 2006 and 2012, which made it clear that Israel was not practicing the academic freedom they claimed as the only democracy in the Middle East to be supporting. And so by 2013, I thought I had made as actually I think it was chair of Committee A when in 2006 when we said that BDS was incompatible with academic freedom. I thought, no, this is a moment of protesting the suppression or the denial of academic freedom to a significant part of the Israeli population, as well as to those in the occupied territories. So just to sort of explain, I think probably most people know, but BDS is boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And it was initiated by Palestinian scholars it was a call from Palestinian scholars to boycott Israeli institutions as in a way to protest the denial of academic freedom that they were experiencing. So that's the sort of the double story. It was a kind of personal in two senses, but the more I learned, the more it made sense to me that a boycott of the kind that was quite successfully used against South Africa, could also be helpful, at least in bringing, I'm not sure, I don't think it has changed Israeli policy, but I think bringing to the fore and bringing to public attention the issues that we wanted to bring to public attention.
Thank you. It would be great to hear from Professor Feingold and Mr. Wallace about your kind of coming to how you kind of have come to the question and the issue. So to start with you, Professor Feingold.
Thanks, Judith. Please feel free to call me John or Jonathan.
Yeah, you can call me Joan.
Okay.
So I think I'll just say a couple very quick words about academic freedom, somewhat sort of detached from um, uh, BDS specifically. But so my first encounter with academic freedom was as a law student. Uh, so I guess two encounters as a law student. One was when there was a member of the faculty who was essentially a serial harasser of students in the classroom. And when students would raise the issue with the administration, the immediate response was academic freedom. And so like that was my first introduction to it. It just seemed to be this cudgel that prevented accountability in the classroom. Um, but I had also a very different sort of experience as a student where one of my mentors, woman of color, giving a speech after receiving a teaching award, noted how academic freedom had been really critical for her ability to withstand all sorts of essentially attacks that she had received, often from white male students who were just unhappy having to be in her class. And so I first encountered it sort of confused. It seemed to be doing different things. And um, At least where I sort of how I understand academic freedom now is in a couple different ways. One is I think it's important to understand that academic freedom remains a tool that often gets deployed to avoid having to have fights over what's actually at stake. Sort of similar to the way I think Joan was talking about it, because it is offered as a neutral principle that is meant to distance someone from what is actually being contested in a way that presents the other party as the politicized party, but not the one who is marshaling academic freedom. And so today, just as an example, I teach education law, and we were um, uh, reading a case from the 80s in which Louisiana had passed a law requiring states to teach creation or schools to teach creationism if they also taught evolution. And one of the arguments that was marshaled by the state was that it was in the interest of academic freedom. The court did not accept it because it was just facially laughable, but it is an example of sort of marshalling academic freedom just as a almost as a almost as a distraction that again is also meant to suggest that the person who is mobilizing the term is the apolitical actor, and the other person is the political actor who is the one who's coming to the situation with values. The other thing that I'll say, maybe the last thing that I'll say now, in parts I also would love to hear the other Jonathan weigh in if he wants to, is I think it's very difficult to have a meaningful conversation about what academic freedom is or what it should be without having a serious conversation about what the university is and what the university should be. So I really think a sort of substantively grounded articulation of academic freedom has to be tethered to what one perceives as the university's role in the United States society. Because it's very different if the university, particularly public universities, as their mission is to pursue truth and knowledge for the common good, as opposed to for the interest of some corporation or some corporate interest or for the state. Because if the university's mission is to further just human knowledge, for our collective benefit, then the way that we understand how academic freedom then gets operationalized in any given context looks different than if you just see the university as a place where you have fancy people who do work and talk about stuff. Um, and so, yeah, so I could say more, but I'll leave it there for now.
Can I just say one thing? Jonathan, that really helped me clarify the question that Judith asked me about why I changed my mind, which was that I realized that academic freedom was not an abstract, neutral term, but that it had to address issues of power and inequality, and that it was more than this sort of empty liberal position that pretended to be neutral when it really wasn't. And so you helped me actually clarify what I would describe as the change for me in 2013.
And Jonathan, do you mind if I get one more thought in before you come in, just because sort of what Joan says, sort of, so, and so Joan, you mentioned sort of power there. And I think when it comes to boycotts, and you're thinking about sort of boycotts in any sort of context, boycotts are necessary as a tool to change behavior because there is a power asymmetry. And so to the extent boycotts are taken off the table as an intervention, then that is increasing the power asymmetry. And so you can just think of why there are attacks on unions or other sorts of collective action. And it is in part because that collective action is often necessary in order to intervene when when the status quo is imbalanced. And which maybe is sort of clear and obvious, but sometimes it's, I don't know, for me, helpful to say.
Wonderful. Thank you. Jonathan Wallace, please.
Uh, so I had to, having a terrible memory for dates, I had to go check the New York court's e-filing system while we were talking to confirm the date that I first had to think about and get involved with BDS. It was 2016. And it's worth describing what happened because it really does set the pattern in a way. I know now it was a kind of test case for a lot of what we're facing today. Somebody basically joined the National Lawyers Guild as a mole and, tried to place an ad in their annual newsletter, uh, congratulating people who were going to get awards at the National Convention. And they deliberately wrote the ad to maximize the likelihood it would be rejected. It actually was an organization we'd never heard of, and the address given was an Israeli illegal settlement in the West Bank. And so the admin who was responsible for placing the ads rejected it, or NLG rejected it. And the admin unwisely told the person on the phone that we don't run ads from Israeli organizations, which was actually a misstatement and got us into no end of trouble we then had to get out of. But basically, the reason that the case was brought, although it substantively had nothing to do with the subject matter, was that Lawyers Guild had passed a BDS resolution. And this was a very successful attempt to troll us and find grounds for a lawsuit. We were almost immediately after that facing a lawsuit from the individual for national origin discrimination against Israelis. And while I was working on that case, which went on for more than a year, I was very honored, by the way, that Lawyers Guild asked me to defend them in that litigation. That's how I met Palestine Legal, who I talk to every week now. And the American Studies Association, as some of you may know, also got sued for a BDS resolution with a kind of similar attack, but which also, was on behalf of members claiming the organization hadn't followed its own bylaws and permitting and, the resolution. And the law firm in Washington that was defending that case reached out to me. I helped them a bit with the Washington litigation. And then the same plaintiffs, experimentally brought, I think, 2 New York litigations, which I more actively helped them dispose of. Our case, we were able to do one of those. There was a very early read, I was able to get pretty strongly that our New York state judge, who had to run for re-election, even if unopposed and endorsed by all parties every 14 years, did not want to be the first New York judge to say that BDS was First Amendment protected speech. And so we saw an opportunity and took it to settle the case without paying any money or giving up anything of importance and to dispose of it. I think the plaintiffs knew at that point that we were aggressively defending and that it wouldn't be very profitable to try and see it all the way through. And there were definitely some infirmities in their discrimination claim. But what makes it kind of a forerunner for uh, everything we're dealing with, or a lot of what we're dealing with today, is that there were several elements. One was that it was an invented lawsuit to basically bully us and put us under pressure not to do something and not to express, organizational views about BDS, about Israel, and about Palestine. Secondly, they proliferated cases, so they brought a total of 3 or 4 cases against the American Studies Association. I think only one against us, but cases that they just kept cropping up like mushrooms, basically. And the third interesting aspect was that in plain sight, we were able to trace Israeli money. The organization, the Zionist litigation shop that came in later to help the solo lawyer who had, joined NLG as a mole and brought the case in the first place, actually calls itself lawfare. You think that they might, think twice before they adopted a name, of that nature for an organization today. And at one point, I was able in plain sight to trace Israeli money from Israel to an American nonprofit to the organization, and that's happened again today. There's a law firm that's going around the United States filing anti-Semitism lawsuits that are from a cookie cutter with the same language on behalf of students against a lot of the same universities that are getting subpoenaed by the House committee. And in that case, too, I could find in plain sight money from Israel to a Florida foundation, to another nonprofit that was represented by the law firm, and so forth. So basically, this was the model for the kind of pounding on the table, shouting, trying to chill us into being frightened of being sued and what the consequences would be and what the optics and publicity were. So today I'm working on BDS matters again. And what's happening now in New York is that, well, first of all, just quickly, many, many red states have passed laws which actually outlaw BDS. And they tend to be in the form of a law which says that you cannot enter into a contract with the state without swearing an oath that you don't advocate BDS. And to me, those laws are patently unconstitutional, and they're obviously viewpoint discrimination. And there has been a lot of litigation over the years. I haven't been involved in any of that, and I believe the courts are pretty much split right now. We've had a couple of good decisions that recognize that those laws are invalid under First Amendment, but you have red state, federal courts, and appeals courts that have gone the other way and claimed that the state can intervene and prohibit BDS as action, not pure speech. It's completely wrong, but that's what we're dealing with the Supreme Court that we have today. When one of these cases gets there, it's a little hard to predict how it will come out. But from where I stand, BDS is solely advocacy. And any attempt to limit it or prohibit it is forbidden under First Amendment. So what we have in New York specifically is Executive Order 157, I think originally issued by Governor Cuomo, but very aggressively enforced. Not even enforced, because it's never been enforced. Very aggressively used as a cudgel by Governor Hochul. And that's, when you read it, it's a very turgid document, but it's very limited. And it basically says that state money cannot be invested with any financial organization which is on a blacklist that the state keeps of organizations that have ever advocated BDS. When I first became aware of it, I checked the blacklist. There were four investment firms on it, none of which I'd ever heard of. None of them was like Fortune 1000, banks, brokerages. They were just little firms, maybe owned by people from the Middle East. And, now they were on a blacklist. They could never receive state money. So 157 was seemed to be mainly for the optics and not something that would have any impact on our real lives before October 7th of last year. The way it's cropping up now is that student senates and faculty senates around New York State that are working on passing BDS resolutions are being bullied by administration at public and private colleges. But this has happened at Vassar. It's happening at City University right now, where admin actually comes in. Like, at Vassar, administration told international students that were on this student senate that they could lose their visas and get deported. I mean, just egregious lies, but they frightened them that if they even attended a meeting at which BDS resolution was under consideration, even if they voted against it, they would be breaking New York state law, and that could trigger a domino effect where they would their visas would be canceled and so forth. In that case, I wrote a letter to admin to try and back them down. That was months ago. More recently, I've been consulting with a faculty senate at City University that's going through the same thing, again, being bullied by administration. Administration showed up at a meeting, brought their lawyer. I wasn't there. They didn't have a lawyer of their own because we didn't know they were going to bring a lawyer to this meeting, and told them that you can't do this. It's illegal. The language of the of 157 is so limited that it doesn't even seem to apply. Like, first of all, you're not a financial organization with which New York State money is parked, like money from a pension fund or something like that. Secondly, you're not on the blacklist. But the position they're taking is that we can't permit or tolerate any kind of BDS-related resolution within the university because it is illegal and breaking the law. Governor Hochul is emulating, the governors of Texas and Florida, running around the state, beating up right now on SJP. We have information about her making private phone calls to presidents of universities in the state, of New York system, and telling them to crack down on our activities. So that's today's resurgence of the BDS controversy.
Thank you. I see Joan has a question.
Yeah, I have a question for you, Jonathan Wallace. I think what you're describing goes beyond BDS. I mean, the treatment of the student protests last spring, and then again this fall, it's just supporting Palestine that
Yeah.
brings the same kind of crackdown that they don't have to advocate supporting BDS. They just have to be students for justice in Palestine, and they're treated in similar ways to what you're describing. Maybe not with the law of the state, but it's as if everything is either really about BDS or it's all about Palestine, and it doesn't matter what particular thing they're advocating.
Hey, that's absolutely right. BDS is actually kind of a sidelight to everything that's going on right now. The kinds of things we're seeing, I've represented or counseled students, a high school student for her participation in student government, received as an honor a parking spot in a Long Island public high school, painted a watermelon, and the principal sent the janitor out to paint over it. I've seen complaints filed with Title VI offices at private New York universities that say that someone wearing a keffiyeh made me, the complainant, feel unsafe. And so there's no end to it. The major issue right now on my radar screen, a bigger one than BDS, is the IIHRA standards, which they're all, the state is also trying to foster. everywhere, and which NYU, for example, has explicitly adopted.
So I guess one question that would be helpful to clarify is well, first of all, what is the kind of relationship and then also the distinction between First Amendment protections and protections on academic freedom? That's one. And then with respect to BDS, since this is an issue that comes up frequently, sort of what is the difference between its commitment to kind of boycotting institutions versus charges that it represents a form of the assault on the academic freedom of individuals.
Well, I can take the first one if you want, because I keep writing about this all the time, about the difference between free speech and academic freedom, which has been completely conflated in many of these discussions. That is that FIRE, for example, the Foundation for Individual Rights, I think now they call it not in education, but of expression, insists that they're the same thing, that the individual right of free speech is the same as the protection that's supposedly offered by academic freedom. AAUP argues that academic freedom is a collective right, a collective and individual right, but it's about a collective right of the faculty based on its expertise to teach, research, and to speak extramurally about political issues. And so individual and so there's something Robert Post calls it competence. There's something beyond opinion that is being offered by teachers, researchers that needs to be protected by academic freedom. So if you're doing research on Palestine, we take it as an example, or you're teaching a course in which you're doing things that might be critical, doing a course in the history of the Middle East, and criticism of Israel comes up in the course. What's happening now is students will complain that they're not feeling safe, that they're not getting the truth. But the argument for the good kind of academic freedom that, John, you were sort of talking about the way in which it's used to kind of avoid taking political positions, but the good kind of academic freedom protects that kind of teaching. And the argument is that we know better than the students about what some of these issues actually are. It's not indoctrination. It's the presentation of materials. It's presentation of arguments. But academic freedom is about protecting that collective right of individuals as faculty members to research and teach and engage in other forms of expressive activity. So I think that and the collapse of that distinction means that everybody, that the marketplace of ideas is really a marketplace, that students' opinions count as much as faculty opinions, that you don't have any notion any longer of what the production of knowledge actually involves, which is a certain kind of competence of expertise, of deep learning over long periods of time. So that's, and I'll let somebody else answer your other
Well,
question.
actually, well, following up on that question, I
Yeah.
want to ask John, especially given your kind of, specific area of expertise around, kind of critical race studies and, related to issues of DEI. I mean, one of the things that has been notable is the extent to which the kind of, attack on, pro-Palestinian speech has been kind of partnered with and coordinated with an attack on DEI. I mean, that was, quite explicit in the Fox Commission, proceedings. It's explicit in Project 2025 and, the evil twin, Project Esther. If people haven't heard of it, I'd recommend looking it up because it's terrifying. So I'm wondering if you can speak, to a little bit to that, how, those issues have become, in particular on the part of those who are attacking the good kind of academic freedom, right? How they've become entwined and how you understand that, especially going forward.
Yeah. So I guess a couple questions in there. One is, I guess, linking attacks on critical race theory with attacks on DEI and um, the sort of October 7th as sort of a bridge between the two. And so one way to understand attacks on critical race theory is that they were not new in the sense that for decades there have been attacks on just inclusionary efforts and the ideas that are bound up with them, particularly in higher education, in part because for all of higher education's faults, has been one of the sectors of the United States or institutions, thinking broadly, that is actually engaged in some semblance of desegregation. You also have the military, which is another sort of entity that also like different sorts of faults, but um, unlike most other sectors, higher education has actually done a relatively good job desegregating, at least in certain respects. But over the course of the 50 years or so when that was happening, it was always contested. It was always under attack. And one of the ways in which it was attacked, any sort of inclusionary effort, was to try to reframe inclusionary efforts as exclusionary efforts, or inclusion as somehow discriminating against some other groups. And so historically, through the late 60s through early 2000s, generally the sort of identity that was positioned as the identity that was harmed by these sorts of integrationary projects were white men. As part of a sort of rhetorical strategy to discredit and delegitimize projects that are meant to change institutions, in part by making them open to everyone. And one thing that you saw really not for the first time, but really in the past 10 years was an intentional shift on the part of certain right-wing groups, heritage among them, to change the narrative to away from white men or white people as the sort of ostensible victim of inclusionary projects to Asian Americans and then Jews. And so if before 2020 and before Chris Rufo enters the scene and sort of offers this script to discredit critical race theory and the country's anti-racist thrust, you had Ed Blum, who is the architect of some of the most destructive Supreme Court cases over the past 10 years, eroding not just affirmative action, but also voting protections. And quite explicitly and openly, he's on tape saying that he needs Asian American plaintiffs in order to continue, again, the Heritage, Koch brother et al. Sort of broader sort of anti-civil rights project that has been ongoing since the civil rights movement. And critical race theory has always been sort of this oddball in the sense that it's this niche discipline, but it's actually provided a lot of the analytical sort of infrastructures, conceptual scaffolding that's traveled into many other disciplines as a way to both just sort of disrupt the way in which the status quo seems natural, as opposed to the function of all sorts of societal dynamics that we call something like racism or sexism. And so in 2020, you have this incredible moment where the entire world is protesting for racial justice. And Chris Rufo sees an opportunity in that moment to intervene by smearing critical race theory as a way to essentially diffuse the public's appetite for anti-racism. And he's like quite open about it. He's quite unapologetic about it. And one of the primary moves to discredit the inclusionary project is to rhetorically brand it as the racist project. And so you see this is where you see sort of the mobilization of terms like woke to delegitimize any sort of inclusionary effort. But also like both in sort of on the campaign trail, in state houses, and in the Supreme Court, a move to describe sort of conscious attention to racism as itself racist. And from like 2020 to 2023, you have a very effective state campaign at the state level, passing laws that are preventing students from being able to access certain content in the classroom, but also um, sort of systematically eroding faculty power within universities. And so there's this other move going on here, in part because the right is very sophisticated and understand where power lies. And so in states like North Carolina, you have an outgoing governor that Republican governor strips the incoming Democratic governor of the ability to appoint boards of trustee members so that the GOP can have a lock on higher education in the state. Similar things in Florida beginning in 2020 under DeSantis. But something happened in 2023. In the summer of 2023, the rhetorical power and just the ability to organize around the really sort of blatantly anti-CRT, anti-trans type rhetoric that had grounded sort of the RUFO movement, the Moms for Liberty movement, was really fading. You had at the local level school board members who were articulating that platform, they were losing. And so it's not like for folks on the right, the cause was not lost. DeSantis had done a lot of damage, but rhetorically, it was becoming harder to just easily discredit sort of anti-racism, just to capture broadly inclusionary projects as racist because like that line had just spewed, like it had, it had run out. October 7th provided a gold mine for all of those folks because at the same time that Rufo was going off about CRT, he's articulating this narrative that that universities are these sites of conflict where these crazy lefties are trying to quote unquote indoctrinate our children, are un-American, are unpatriotic. And then the rise of actual protests provide something concrete to validate this thing that he is saying. And he's also very explicit. He says that what conservatives need to do, this is still on Twitter because he leaves everything on Twitter because he's proud of it and no one holds him accountable. It's like what needs to do is conservatives need to connect BLM to BDS to DSM, Democratic Socialists for America, delegitimize them all, make like the center left disown them. And so there he's essentially articulating like a mid-20th century fascist type play to discredit and sort of divide your enemies in order to consolidate power. And Joan, I saw wanted to jump in. I'm talking too long, but the last thing that I'll say here is that the move to in the most cynical way, weaponize legitimate anxiety about anti-Semitism in order to further this decades-long project to take power back and to delegitimize efforts to make America sort of more of a multiracial democracy. It's been really effective, in part because there have been bipartisan allies, in part because it's a complex issue. The Jewish community is split, even though majority of Jews are like the 1,300 Jewish faculty who signed the letter, understand what's happening. But it was also a play that the media was just either like unwilling to deal with or was just played and did not understand, was unable to simply explain to the American public that there was a open, naked communication strategy that was being deployed. And now the last thing that I'll say is that and so you got this move from like calling the left woke to racist to terrorists, because the move is to now associate everyone with Hamas through law. And when you have folks like Chuck Schumer support the IRA definition of anti-Semitism through the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act or otherwise, he or universities like NYU or the University of Texas, whether or not they are intending to, they are enabling what is going to be one of Trump's primary moves to try to decapitate the left. Hopefully not in a literal sense, but at least in a financial sense, through stripping nonprofit status and otherwise just creating sort of reaping economic havoc on his political opponents. So that was long, maybe too
Yeah,
sort
no, that was
of
great.
circuitous.
But I just wanted to add that um, anti-Semitism is the gift for that because it not only has a kind of general appeal, liberal, conservative, and so on, but it's really deeply rooted, I think, in a certain kind of humanistic outlook on things. So that tied as it is to the Holocaust, to crimes against humanity at the end of World War II, it's that there's a kind of connection between, for liberals and conservatives, um, uh, between their kind of humanitarian instincts and something connected to Israel. And so even for non-Zionists, the call of Israel and the pull of Israel, and the denunciation of criticism of it in the name of anti-Semitism does work that CRT could never do for Christopher Rufo. I mean, I think there's something. I'm not a student of this, but I think that we really need to think why the anti-Semitism thing is so powerful a way of bringing together, John, all those things that were sort of waiting to be brought together, as you described them, I think really well in the history of Rufo and his people. And just one thing I wanted to add is that FIRE, I mentioned it before, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, has been attacking the AAUP ever since the AAUP rewrote its boycott resolution. And it's no accident that that's the case. And they've been arguing that AAUP's position defending DEI is a violation of individuals' academic freedom, those who do not agree with the AAUP position. So that they're all tied up. I mean that I wrote a critique of FIRE, and there's a big long thing in somewhere today by Greg Lukianoff, the guy's president, in which at one point he says, they think they're in charge, that they defending academic freedom, but they support DEI. It's like, and they support, which the AAUP actually doesn't support BDS. It just says those who do are protected by academic freedom, should not be punished for it. So the way that those things, I mean, the way you started talking about it, I thought in my own experience in the last couple of days with these FIRE people, the weaving together of their objections to the AAUP stand on boycotts, to DEI, all of the sort of social justice issues get lumped together with the anti-Semitism crusade or the anti-Semitism crusade in ways that I think we need to figure out because I don't have a sense. Maybe John and Jonathan, you do have some sense of how that's working so effectively right now.
Well, it's
Uh,
oh, sorry. Let me.
yeah.
I just want to say that it seems to me that part of what's really crucial is, as John pointed out, that I mean the question of the bipartisan allies, and not least, I mean, because this is not. It's also not just happening at universities in the South, right? I mean, so you're talking about the participation of the university presidents and administrators like our universities, right, our universities, and people who do support, at least pay lip service to ideas of DEI, I mean, but somehow, this issue, they're not reading sufficiently closely the Rufo tweets to understand like how the issues are connected. And I think like also in the union context, it might be helpful to fold in, right, the kind of broader project of taking down unions, as part of that decapitating the left project. Anyway, Jonathan Wallace, please.
So I wanted to add one uh, moving part, which is that there's a diabolical Machiavellian and kind of extraordinarily clever plan to use DEI in the universities everywhere. I mean, this is happening at Columbia, at NYU, uh, to dismantle itself. and that's by filing anti-Semitism complaints. Because what has happened at NYU, for example, is that the very few of these offices called themselves DEI. They all have different three-letter acronyms, but that's what they are. At New York, it's the New York University. It's the Office of Equal Opportunity. When I first started working there, pretty soon after October 7th, it was months before I represented a white student or faculty member. The DEI office, based on complaints coming in from Zionist students, but in many cases from complete outsiders, because most universities will accept anonymous complaints to the DEI operation from anyone. They were grinding through every Palestinian faculty member, every Palestinian, Arab, Muslim student, and then expanding to other students of color involved in the movement. And I had a conversation then where I said, "Are you aware how your Title VI office has become a weapon of Title VI discrimination itself?" Uh, so it's like hiring. There was a Jack London novel, Left Unfinished, when he died, in which someone hires a hitman to take a contract out on himself, and that's what's happening now. That two goals are being accomplished. That people of color are being driven out of the university, and the office that's being used to do it is the enemy that they were trying to shut down, and they're delegitimizing it. I had one other detail I thought might be of interest when you asked, how do we combat this extremely, very similarly Machiavellian use of anti-Semitism? In two of my student discipline cases, we put Satmar Hasidic rabbis on the stand. They're anti-Zionist rabbis. And I had one who was particularly effective. He just was so energetic and enthusiastic to explain how, from the river to the sea, it's not anti-Semitic and so forth. But on Zoom, he was, he was an Orthodox rabbi wearing the yarmulke, the payas, the tefillin, and a keffiyeh. And you could just see the student conduct panel's brains starting to run out of their ears.
I
Yeah,
think,
please, Jonathan. Yeah. John.
and whether we sort of dig into it now or just to sort of, at a minimum, I'll just hit it again, the point that you made, Judith, about how this is also about attacks on unions. And what Joan is just reflecting on how FIRE, one of the entities in the country that really has built up a quite effective brand as being a primary defender of academic freedom, to be going after AAUP, which is like one of the very few entities that is trying to collectively organize workers who happen to be academics through unions and otherwise. Because it's sort of just circling it all back to academic freedom. Whatever one's view of academic freedom is, you also have to have a theory as to how it is that that right is actually realized. If there is a right or an interest to academic freedom or an interest in it, because rights are never self-effectuating, self-effectuating. I don't know. It's late enough. I can not have all the words, but they don't just manifest in themselves. One of the primary themes that you learn as a law student is that there's all these rights out there, but depending on your access to various resources and other things, that's a function of whether or not you're actually going to be able to enjoy the right, that it is there. And I think it's just a very curiously naive view to think that any right that in the abstract worker who happens to be a faculty member has, they're actually going to be able to enjoy unless they're able to enforce it. And the primary way, at least, that workers in any sort of organization enforce rights is, through collective power, or through actually having formal control through some sort of membership like corporation. And so, which is just to say that whatever your view of academic freedom is, to be more concerned about institutions that are sort of articulating why it is consistent with academic freedom for an institution to credit a faculty member's contribution to making a more inclusionary institution, that you're more concerned with that than all the other things that are happening through Rufo-like strategies in places like Florida, where Governor DeSantis dissolved all the 8 adjunct faculty unions this past year. It's, it's just deeply flawed analysis or something else is going on, because it is just misunderstanding how it is that professors can actually realize whatever right they might have.
Thank you. I'm wondering if maybe we should go ahead. I mean, this has been, wonderfully, wonderful to have all of you in conversation, but I did also promise that we would have some time for questions from our audience. And I'm also aware of the time, and I know that John had some, obligations waiting for him. So maybe I'll go ahead and open it up and see if we have questions. Sherry, I don't know if you're there, and I guess we can great say that people can either raise their hands and ask questions themselves, or put questions in the chat. I mean, I have more questions if people would like us to.
And I can say one more thing
Oh,
before
please.
I
Yes,
might
while
head,
people are
which is,
reflecting on questions. Yeah.
but just because I think, so when it comes to EDI statements, so another critique of the AAUP has been that the AAUP, what I found to be a quite thoughtful recent statement, articulated why, as a general matter, there's no conflict necessarily between an institution that credits contributions to equity, diversity, and inclusion and academic freedom. And that was hit with all the same sorts of retorts that we see sort of with the BDS thing, that it's, that AAUP is abandoning its members, like disregarding academic freedom, which is a point that you only get to if your understanding of the institute or of academic freedom is one that is disconnected from the university's mission to, promote robust and open inquiry and pursue truth and knowledge for the common good. Because if you just think, so a place like University of Chicago, no one's going to think of University of Chicago as soft in academic freedom. In its formal criteria, it credits really great teaching. Now, really great teaching must mean equipping your students, your undergrads, your grad students, to avoid the whole web of cognitive biases and heuristics, including ones that have to do with sort of race or gender, that undermine our ability to engage in the more objective, more rigorous analysis that we need to be doing regardless of the field that we're in. Now, that's a paradigmatic sort of EDI type contribution, to be prophylactically equipping your students to engage in better research. And which is, in a sense, to sort of reveal that oftentimes when there is a fight over DEI that might be sort of framed as an issue about academic freedom, it's often a proxy for what the institution should actually be counting as merit, what we should be crediting, what we shouldn't be crediting. And so, but it's just another sort of moment in which academic freedom is deployed to suggest that the person it is deployed against is the political actor with the sort of political agenda, and prevents like a serious conversation that an institution should be having about what gets credited, how and why. And then connected to it, we also know that pretty much every faculty member has to write a research statement and a teaching statement. And there might be faculty members who think they should not have to teach, and that it is a total violation of their, free speech rights to have to say anything about teaching. But we never conceptually place the research statement or the teaching statement in the sort of, this is in tension with academic freedom box. But as a matter of imposing on the individual faculty member an obligation to be writing something about they might not actually care about, the main difference is that one is, under attack, and the other, is generally accepted not with the exception of like, a couple folks on campus who always are curmudgeon-y about the fact that they have to write it.
That's it. That's a really useful and helpful analogy. So we do have one question in the chat about the risks that academic unions take by taking BDS positions and how to mitigate those. Yes,
I
John.
actually have some firsthand knowledge of a union, which in New York City, it's a local, it's not an academic union. It was a local of the Teamsters, which had passed a BDS resolution and received first an information letter. And then so I didn't, I talked to them back and forth. We lost touch some months ago. So I'm going to utter some facts tentatively. I know that the House Committee on Education and the Workforce had sent them an information request letter similar to the one it had sent to Columbia, MIT, Harvard, et cetera, to look into the fact that they had passed a BDS resolution in the local. Um, the interesting thing is that they never uh, subpoenaed them or brought them in to testify that I know of. They never issued press releases that got mainstream media attention. All the attention went to the universities. The difference may be, and because I haven't spoken to them in a few months, I can't say for sure, but they were the one entity that I'm aware of that actually told the House Committee to fuck off and did not comply. You know, the universities that sent their presidents, all of whom resigned very quickly afterwards, were not under subpoena. They were cooperating voluntarily and very cravenly because they would have absolutely had a right to tell the House Committee to take a walk and say, we're protecting the academic freedom of our people and community, and we are not going to comply. They did the opposite and immediately started shoveling documents to Congress. So the union was the one entity that I'm aware of that actually did tell the House Committee to go away and leave us alone, not doing a damn thing. And there's a lot more learning on this because the House basically sunsets every 2 years after elections. And so a subpoena that gets issued during a congressional term becomes invalid unless it's reissued by the next. So we ran out the clock on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce. And in order to hold anyone in contempt for refusing to obey a legal summons to come into court, they would have had to have actually, gotten the Justice Department involved, gone to court, and tried to enforce these things. And obviously, the clock's run out. They're not going to do that. That's not to say that there won't be a brand new House Committee, in the next term that picks this up again. We have to wait and see. But I thought it was kind of a one answer, anecdotal, very limited, but an answer to that question that I'm aware of a union that actually toughed it out and got left alone as a result. And that actually maps pretty well back to the McCarthy era because there were people like I.F. Stone who never got subpoenaed, who the House Committee could never, figure out how to get their hooks into. So you could actually subtract yourself from the general atmosphere of panic and fear and just carry on. And I think, that's one thing that the university should have investigated and that we will need to explore in months and years to come.
Wonderful, thank you. So there are a bunch of questions here. I'm going to start with the last one because it's directly related to the pressing matter of our own union's BDS resolution. Kind of wondering about what how we might understand what good might be done by the unions adopting a BDS resolution. Especially given the everything that you've all laid out about the extent to which forces are really strongly arrayed against attempting to use BDS and pro-Palestinian speech in general as a way to dismantle, faculty governance, university governance, academic freedom, et cetera. So if you have, any thoughts to answer those understandable fears in the wake of everything that you've laid out and the um, Heritage Foundation documents lay out, it would be great to hear from you.
Judith, I'm just looking at the question. It's the one that says we've made an incredibly good case about the deep-pocketed
Yes.
groups who are weaponizing BDS resolutions.
Can we have a moment on the good the resolution will do, a question from sympathy, and the resolution with the resolution, but out of real anxiety?
Or Joan, are you going to jump in?
No,
I
go
was just going to say, I mean, I don't think there's an alternative in the face of all of this. I mean, I think backing down or worrying that somehow they're going to come after us, or you in this case, is not going to get us anywhere. I mean, I feel like we're in a moment when I think somebody was quoting somebody the other day who said, I can't predict what's going to happen, but I know I have to take responsibility for opposing it. And that feels like the position that we're in and that we have to take because uh, anticipating. I mean, I think Jonathan's story about the Teamsters, and wasn't it Eric Banks, also the superintendent of schools in New York, who stood up to them and told
Yeah,
them
he also
he
had
was
some,
running his
that's,
schools and there was no anti, he was dealing with it and they should just forget it, and they let him alone too. I mean, I think there is some, and what I was just wondering, Jonathan, this is a parenthesis, but the Teamsters organize graduate students, right? So how many graduate students in that union got that BDS resolution passed? That's what I would like to know, just as a historian. But that aside, I mean, I think we have to. I don't think there's any choice but to stand up to this stuff because the other thing is to sort of accept what they're doing, and that somehow empowers them even further.
So my comment was similar to that. I think that like the question is, well, what is your analysis of this moment? And I think for many, it's increasingly that ceding any ground is just ground that will not get made up. And it's unlikely, I think, that unions, faculty members, universities are going to be able to just sort of cower and hide. Um, they're just going to get bulldozed. And so I think the question is how um, different sorts of people working in different sectors are working together to fight back in a moment where it's going to be like the game board is going to be different. It's going to be shifting, and it's going to be really important to figure out how to collectively take stands together and to like work with like for you and your colleagues to do all of that work because there's no one that's coming. And so that's not me really sort of responding to any particular sort of um, uh, proposal or petition, but I think just an analysis of this moment that um, I don't think I don't think one is necessarily positioned better by not taking action.
Wonderful. That was, incredibly helpful. And of course, it's also part of the job of the union to protect our, kind of most, vulnerable and targeted faculty. I mean, and so by taking a strong, so it's not, and I think, but part of what has really emerged out of the discussion is how the question of Palestine is intimately linked to many of the other social justice and equity questions that are, at the heart of our union's mission in the first place. So I'm just going to move back and note that there was a question about hi Ajanta, a question about the weaponization of Title VI. And what we can do conceivably to kind of push back against it. And in particular, related to the point about, protecting, those amongst our faculty who are most targeted and most vulnerable.
Sue the universities and sue the Department of Education. I'm preparing a case I hope to file in the next month in which I sue a private university and the Department of Education, with which it signed a consent decree to adopt the IHRA standards in its internal activity. And litigation is a way, it's one way. It's not far from being the only way, but it's one way to get our own narrative out there. It's like there's been a highly successful surprise attack where the other side has captured the narrative with this very persuasive, viral, sticky concept of, of this false anti-Semitism, which, being Jewish myself, I might mention, because my last name doesn't reveal it, is just so obviously not anti-Semitism in reality. But, it's just one of those things where, you say the word and everybody falls down, thought stops. And so being heard against that kind of noise is possible, but we need to really design ways and means that will be most effective. So one thing I'm just going to throw out there, without sounding like I'm pressuring people, but when we talk to groups about suing the university, obviously it's not for everybody. There are possible plaintiffs that are much more vulnerable than others. Adjuncts are more vulnerable than tenured professors. International students and faculty are more vulnerable than American citizens. But just further to the statements people were making about how backing down and being quiet are not going to be the way to win this. I think more people, willing to. We have one lawsuit pending at the University of Pennsylvania to try to prevent compliance with the House information letter there. We've talked. We're talking about doing one for Rutgers, which I hope will come to fruition soon. But I've had conversations at a number of other universities where the vibe is, well, we just don't want to take a stand right now. We want to keep our heads down, don't want to rock the boat. But that allows the new power structure that's being created to undo the university to be set in stone and to harden over time. So it really would be better to mount more counterattacks than we've been able to do so far. And that goes for the weaponization of Title VI and the IHRA standard.
Would it make sense for Palestinian students to bring Title VI complaints and suits?
So that's very actively happening.
Mm-hmm.
Palestine legal, Muslim advocates and CARE are all working on that. I'm not personally a big fan. I'm also going to say tentatively, because the Department of Education, subject to a 2019 executive order from Donald Trump, is applying the IHRA standard. So I'd rather sue the Department of Education than file administrative complaints. But that said, just in terms of the narrative, in terms of baffling and confusing DOE, and and intruding upon public attention the fact that we are being discriminated against, I think it's it's an effective tactic. Not sure it's an effective legal move right now, but it's an activist tactic that appears to be working.
And I think in what Jonathan's saying is also just, it's a moment where it's like really helpful and necessary to be creative. And so just because a university passes a particular policy, the words don't like have meaning in themselves. And so trying to figure out how one can sort of leverage policy in different sorts of ways. And one like with NYU, I think sort of the policy sort of with the very sort of explicit incorporation of the IRA definition has language along the lines of for some people, Zionism is an inextricable part of their Jewish identity. It's all, and that, descriptively could be true. It's also descriptively probably true that for some Jewish people, anti-Zionism is part of their religious identity. And so, like, there, you could imagine Jewish students, Jewish faculty members sort of suing on the basis like that, well, this policy, because it is overtly anti-Zionist, it is anti-Semitic, at least to the extent like it is like, in the reverse. Um, and I think it's also like probably another moment, sort of in zooming out a little bit, where um, in also sort of shifting a different narrative is having there's possibly benefits to all the like little fights that are happening everywhere to be moments in which the it's also named that one of the problems that we have within universities is that they're so anti-democratic. And so part of what needs to happen in order for the university to be better positioned to realize its public mission, because even the private universities are nonprofit, like because ostensibly they are serving a public mission, is that they have to be democratized themselves, which requires formally shifting like where power resides. And that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing, but you could imagine, the benefit of just a public narrative or discourse that is identifying the problem as part of the problem is that so much power is concentrated within boards of trustees whose interests are either more aligned with, corporate entities or state actors who are openly hostile to their own people. As just, different sorts of sort of rhetorical and other strategies that are part of whatever sort of fight is happening in any given instance.
So we're, oh, yeah,
I,
oh, so,
I
please.
haven't, just a quick response to the latest post in the chat. I have anti-Zionist Jewish plaintiffs in some of the cases that I'm bringing, and we are planning to develop that narrative as much as we can.
Oh,
Uh,
fabulous.
can I offer a quick case study that I think responds to something that Jonathan just said?
Yeah, so I just
Uh,
want to say that we're aiming to
yeah,
wrap up by 8:30. So I want to make sure that you yes, get in your last gem of wisdom, and then I'll give everyone an opportunity to make some final comments if you have them, and then I'll thank
actually, since that deadline is just 4 minutes away, what I was about to say was not that important, and I'm going to
you.
yield back to you.
Well, I just want to give all of you an opportunity if you have any kind of final thoughts, comments, recommendations, suggestions, words of encouragement, to take this moment to share them. Joan. Oh, I think you might be muted.
I mean, I think I said I said what I said, and there was I don't know if you saw that there was a forum in the Chronicle of Higher Education yesterday that was on faculty's reaction to the Trump administration, and in that one I said that institutional neutrality was no longer an option. The public statements of institutional neutrality were no longer an option, and I was actually citing Michael Roth and Patricia McGuire, two university presidents who have the only two that I know of who have actually taken a stand and in defending the mission of the university against these attacks have said that there's no and cite Nazi Germany as the example not to follow. That institutional neutrality and the kind of academic freedom as neutrality that John talked about at the beginning are not options. And that what we have to do in the positions we take is be very clear about our ethical positions in these things, that equal justice, diversity in the university, these are part of the mission of a university in a democratic society. And those are the things I think we have to keep fighting for, even as they, come after us in one way or another. And I think John's right that we don't really know what lies ahead and where the strategic openings are going to happen for the kinds of action that will make something of a difference in the next 4 years.
Well, and I guess that also raises the question of like, where that places the union on the question of neutrality.
Well, union, it seems to me, people have said this already, that the values of unions and the importance of collective bargaining cannot be underestimated. And what the union stands for is not just higher wages for its faculty. It's social values. It's the mission of the university that for university unions are critical.
Yeah. So a couple very quick things. So there is no union. The union is just you all.
Hmm.
It's not something that exists out there in the world. And neutrality is like like there's no survival with neutrality right now. And so I think it is a moment where, again, I do think the game board has shifted. I'm not sure thinking in 4-year terms is relevant in the way that it long has. And so I think it's just important to be real about that. Maybe it is. And I'm sort of misdiagnosing some things. But when it comes to higher education, the Trump administration is both going to try to dismantle higher ed and capture it at the same time in the way that DeSantis has done in Florida. And so I think the question is, there is going to be a fight, and how do you want to fight? And I think for faculty members, for higher ed workers, they're going to be better off when they are working with each other in as sort of as disciplined and organized way in a moment that's not the story we want to be living, but the one that we've got.
Thank you.
So,
And thank you all for having me.
Oh, really our pleasure. Jonathan, one last nugget.
yeah, so this is the scariest time of my lifetime for freedom of speech and for civil liberties and personal safety in general. But if you read the history, I can't say that they were as bad, but there have been several other kind of dangerous moments and crossroads in American history. One actually occurred around 1800 with the Alien and Sedition Acts. 1914, there was a lot of domestic repression that Woodrow Wilson started in support of getting America into World War I. 1948 to 1960, usually known as the McCarthy era, Vietnam era, had its own wrinkles. Now we have today. The one kind of through line is that in each of those eras, first of all, they illustrate that it was possible to make a comeback from the brink, and things did get better. And that didn't happen accidentally. You can trace the characters in each of those eras who stood their ground and just persisted and kept on coming back. And so that's what we need to do today, stand our ground.
Thank you. Well, it's with just immense gratitude to all of you for teaching us so much and inspiring us so much. And as you can see from the comments in the chat, I really am speaking on behalf of everyone who had the privilege of being here with you tonight. Just immense gratitude, and obviously we'll keep you posted on what happens here, and solidarity with all of you in kind of keeping up with this struggle in really tough time.
Thanks for doing this too, Judith. It was really inspired, I think,
Yes, thank you.
to create this. Yeah.
All right. Well, to be continued. Thank you so much.
And everybody.
Good night.
Good night.